I remember everything about that day. Every sound, every smell, every color that filled that hospital room. The walls were painted a soft cream, almost golden in the afternoon light streaming through the blinds. My daughter had just been born, and she was perfect. Tiny fingers wrapped around mine, her eyes closed in peaceful sleep, her chest rising and falling with the gentle rhythm of new life. I was exhausted, my body aching in ways I'd never imagined, but my heart was full, fuller than it had ever been. My husband, David, stood beside the bed, his hand resting on my shoulder. He'd been there through every contraction, every scream, every moment of doubt when I thought I couldn't push anymore. He whispered that he loved me, that our daughter was beautiful, that we were finally a real family. I believed every word. I had no reason not to. The nurse came in with a clipboard and a warm smile. "Just need you to review this before we file it," she said, placing the document in my hands. It was the birth certificate, official, permanent, the piece of paper that would follow my daughter through her entire life. I glanced at my name, typed neatly in black ink. Then I looked at the line beneath it, the father's name. My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to tilt. The soft golden light turned harsh, almost blinding. I blinked, thinking maybe the exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But the letters didn't change. The name staring back at me wasn't David's. It was Michael Harrison, a name I'd never heard before. A man I'd never met, a complete stranger who, according to this document, was the father of the child I'd just brought into the world. There's been a mistake," I whispered, my voice trembling. I looked up at David, expecting him to be as confused as I was. But what I saw in his eyes wasn't confusion. It was something else. Something I couldn't quite name in that moment, but it made my stomach turn. He looked away. "What is this?" I asked, louder now, holding the paper toward him. "Why is this name on here?" The nurse leaned over, her smile fading as she looked at the certificate. "Oh, let me check. Sometimes there are clerical errors during the rush. Let me take this back to records." But David didn't say a word. He just stood there, his jaw tight, his hands suddenly in his pockets. The silence between us was heavier than the weight of my daughter in my arms. My heartbeat roared louder than the soft beeping of the machines around me. Something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. That single line on a piece of paper shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. But to understand how much that moment destroyed me, you have to know what came before. You have to know about the life I thought I was living. The marriage I thought was built on honesty. The love I believed was real. David and I met 7 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. I was reading a book, something I always did on Sunday mornings, to escape the noise of my week. He walked in, ordered a black coffee, and sat at the table next to mine. We made eye contact just once, and he smiled. It was the kind of smile that felt genuine, not rehearsed, not like he was trying too hard, just warm. He asked what I was reading. I told him. We talked for an hour, then another. Before I knew it, the sun was setting, and the barista was wiping down tables, giving us the look that said we'd overstayed our welcome. But I didn't care. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone who saw me, really saw me. We started dating a week later. He was everything I'd ever wanted, attentive without being clingy, confident without being arrogant. He remembered small details about me, the way I took my tea, the name of my childhood dog, the fact that I hated surprises but loved spontaneous road trips. He made me feel safe in a world that had always felt unpredictable. 2 years later, he proposed. It was nothing extravagant, just the two of us on a hiking trail we loved, overlooking the valley as the sun dipped below the mountains. He got down on one knee and said, "I don't need anything else in this world but you." I cried. I said yes. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Our wedding was small, intimate, just close friends and family. My mother cried through the entire ceremony. David's brother, who I'd only met a handful of times, gave a toast about how David had finally found the one. I remember looking at David that night, his tie loosened, his hair messy from dancing, and thinking, this is it. This is the life I was meant to live. When I got pregnant 2 years into our marriage, it felt like the natural next step. David was overjoyed. He painted the nursery himself, soft lavender walls with tiny white stars scattered across the ceiling. He attended every doctor's appointment, held my hand during every ultrasound, and talked to my belly every night before we went to sleep. He told our daughter stories, even though she couldn't hear him yet. He promised her the world. There was never a reason to doubt him, not once. Not when he stayed up with me during my worst bouts of morning sickness. Not when he rubbed my swollen feet after long days. Not when he whispered that I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, even when I felt like a beached whale. But love, I would soon learn, can hide the darkest secrets beneath the gentlest smiles. The hospital kept the birth certificate to investigate the error. That's what they called it. An error, like someone had just typed the wrong letter in an email address. But I knew better. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, in the way David avoided looking at me for the rest of that day. When we brought our daughter home, Emma, we'd named her, the house felt different. The lavender walls David had painted so lovingly now seemed mocking. The stars on the ceiling felt like they were watching me, judging me for not seeing the truth sooner. David went through the motions of being a father. He held Emma, changed her diapers, made bottles. But there was a distance in his eyes, a wall between us that hadn't been there before. I started making calls. First to the hospital records department. They told me they were looking into it, that these things happen sometimes with digital filing systems. But when I pressed them, when I asked how a completely different name could end up on an official document, they got vague. "We'll get back to you, Mrs. Parker." Days passed. Then a week, no callback. I tried the county records office. They pulled up our file and confirmed that yes, the name Michael Harrison had been submitted as the father. Not by the hospital, by someone with authorization to file the birth certificate. My hands shook as I held the phone. "Who filed it?" I asked. There was a pause. Papers shuffling. "It was filed electronically by David Parker, your husband." The line went dead, not because they hung up, but because I did. I couldn't breathe. I sat on the edge of our bed, Emma sleeping peacefully in her bassinet beside me, and I tried to make sense of what I'd just heard. David had filed the certificate. David had put that name on there, intentionally. That night, I pretended to sleep. I lay perfectly still, listening to the rhythm of David's breathing beside me. Around midnight, his phone buzzed. Once, twice. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake me, and walked into the hallway. I heard his voice, low and urgent. I know, okay? She's asking questions." A pause. "No, I didn't tell her." "What do you want me to say?" "That you—" He stopped mid-sentence. I held my breath. "Michael, I can't do this anymore. You need to fix this. You need to fix what you did. Michael, the name from the certificate." My heart pounded so loud I was sure he'd hear it through the walls. I waited until he came back to bed, until his breathing evened out again. Then I grabbed my phone and searched the name. Michael Harrison, Portland, Oregon. I found him in minutes. A real estate agent, mid-40s, dark hair, hazel eyes, and in one of the photos on his agency website, standing beside him at some charity event, was a woman who looked so much like me, it made my skin crawl. Same height, same hair color, same build, but it wasn't me, and that was the moment I knew this wasn't a clerical error. It was a confession in disguise. I waited 3 days before I confronted him. 3 days of pretending everything was normal while my insides twisted into knots. 3 days of feeding Emma, changing her, rocking her to sleep. All while my mind screamed with questions I was too terrified to ask out loud. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. David came home from work like always, 6:30, briefcase in hand, tie loosened. He kissed the top of my head and asked what was for dinner, as if nothing was wrong, as if the entire foundation of our lives wasn't crumbling beneath us. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He froze, just for a second, but I saw it, the flicker of panic in his eyes before he masked it with confusion. "About what?" I placed my phone on the kitchen counter between us. On the screen was the photo of Michael Harrison. "Who is he?" David's face went pale. He set down his briefcase slowly, carefully, like he was buying time to think of a lie. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," I said, my voice breaking. "Don't you dare lie to me right now. I called the county. I know you filed Emma's birth certificate. I know you put his name on it. So tell me, who is Michael Harrison?" The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Emma started crying from the nursery, but neither of us moved. Finally, David sank into a chair and put his head in his hands. "He's my brother," he whispered. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "What?" "My half-brother, from my dad's first marriage. We don't talk about him. The family pretends he doesn't exist." "Why?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why would you put his name on our daughter's birth certificate?" David looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Shame. Deep, paralyzing shame. Because it was supposed to protect me. "Protect you from what?" He took a shaky breath. "Michael had a daughter, years ago, with a woman named Claire, the woman you probably found in that photo. They had a child out of wedlock, and when she was born, he panicked. He didn't want his name on the certificate because he was engaged to someone else, someone his career depended on. So he asked me for a favor. He asked me to say I was the father, to put my name down so he could walk away clean." My hands were shaking. "You pretended to be the father of another man's child?" "It was just paperwork," he said desperately. "I never met the kid. I just signed a form. It was years ago, before I even met you. I thought it was over. But when Emma was born," he trailed off. "When Emma was born, what?" I could barely get the words out. David looked at me, and in that moment, I saw the truth before he even said it. I saw it in the way his shoulders slumped, in the way his eyes couldn't meet mine. "Michael's daughter died," he whispered. 2 years ago. Car accident. And when he found out you were pregnant, he asked me to do something. He said he wanted a second chance. That if I put his name on Emma's certificate, he could pretend she was his. That he could have his daughter back in some way. I couldn't breathe. "So you gave him our daughter?" "Not legally," David said quickly. "It's just a name. It doesn't mean anything. You're her mother. I'm raising her. But she's not yours either, is she?" The words hung in the air like a death sentence. David's face crumpled. For a long moment, he said nothing. And then, so quietly I almost didn't hear him, he said, "No." The room spun. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. "What did you just say?" "Emma isn't mine," he said, tears streaming down his face now. "I found out a month before she was born. The paternity test I took, it came back negative. But I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to lose you. So I thought, if I just put Michael's name on the certificate instead of leaving it blank, it would buy me time to figure out what to do. But then you saw it, and everything fell apart. I thought betrayal had limits, but I was wrong. It had my daughter's name written all over it." I didn't cry, not then, not when he told me, not when he begged me to stay, not when he swore he loved Emma anyway. That biology didn't matter. I just stood there, numb, staring at the man I thought I knew, and realizing I'd been married to a stranger. I packed a bag that night. Just enough for Emma and me. David didn't try to stop me. He just sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, while I loaded the car. I drove to my mother's house 2 hours away, and I didn't look back. The first few days were a blur. My mother didn't ask questions. She just held Emma while I sat on her couch and stared at nothing. But slowly the shock began to wear off, and beneath it something else emerged. Something sharp and furious and unyielding. Anger, not just at David, at Michael, at the lie that had stolen the most important moment of my life, at the system that allowed a man to claim a child that wasn't his without any consequences, at myself for not seeing it sooner. But anger, I realized, could be useful. Anger could be fuel. I hired a lawyer, a good one. Her name was Rebecca Hartman, and she had a reputation for taking on cases no one else would touch. When I walked into her office and told her my story, she didn't flinch. She just nodded and said, "Let's burn this to the ground." We started with a DNA test, not just for Emma, for me too. I needed proof that she was mine, that I was the only parent who had any legal claim to her. The results came back a week later. Emma was mine, 100%, and David wasn't her father. Neither was Michael, which meant Emma's real father was someone else entirely, someone I had to find. Rebecca subpoenaed hospital records, phone records, financial statements. We built a timeline of David's lies, every conversation with Michael, every forged document, every moment he chose deception over truth. And slowly a picture emerged. David and Michael had been running this scheme for years, not just with Emma. They'd falsified birth certificates for at least 3 other children. Babies born to women Michael had relationships with, babies he didn't want to claim. David had been his alibi, his cleanup crew. When I found out, I felt sick. But I also felt vindicated. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about justice for every woman they'd lied to. Every child whose identity had been stolen before they were old enough to understand. We filed a lawsuit. Against David, against Michael. Against the county for allowing the fraud to continue unchecked. The local news picked up the story. Birth certificate scandal rocks Portland families. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Other women started coming forward with their own stories of suspicious birth certificates, of names that didn't match, of men who'd disappeared. David tried to contact me. He sent emails, texts, voicemails. He said he was sorry, that he'd made a mistake, that he still loved me. I deleted every single one without reading past the first line. Michael, on the other hand, tried to run. He shut down his real estate business and moved out of state. But Rebecca was faster. She tracked him down and served him papers in a grocery store parking lot in Nevada. I wish I could have seen his face. The court case took 8 months. 8 months of depositions and testimonies and sleepless nights. 8 months of reliving the worst moment of my life over and over again. But when the judge finally ruled in my favor, when she ordered a new birth certificate with only my name listed as the parent, when she fined David and Michael for fraud and perjury, when she mandated counseling and restitution for every family they'd hurt, I felt something I hadn't felt in almost a year. Peace. He thought he could bury the truth, but I was done living among the dead. Winning the case didn't erase the pain. It didn't undo the betrayal or bring back the life I thought I'd had, but it gave me something more important: freedom. Freedom from the lies. Freedom from the man who'd stolen my trust. Freedom to start over. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a living room barely big enough for a couch, and Emma's playpen. But it was mine, ours. No ghosts haunted these walls. No memories of promises that turned out to be lies. Emma was 8 months old by then. She was crawling, babbling, reaching for everything she could touch. She didn't understand what had happened. She didn't know that the man she'd spent her first weeks of life with wasn't her father. And I was grateful for that. I wanted her to grow up free from the weight of our story. Free to be her own person, untainted by the mess the adults around her had made. My mother visited often. She'd bring groceries, help with laundry, hold Emma while I took a shower or tried to catch a few hours of sleep. She never said, "I told you so," even though I knew she'd always had her doubts about David. She just loved me. Quietly, steadily, the way a mother should. I started therapy. At first I resisted. I didn't want to talk about it anymore. I didn't want to relive the moment I saw that name on the birth certificate, or the look in David's eyes when he finally told the truth. But my therapist, Dr. Chen, was patient. She didn't push. She just listened. And slowly, week by week, I started to unpack the layers of grief and anger and shame I'd been carrying. "You're allowed to mourn the life you thought you had," she told me one afternoon. "Even if it was based on a lie, the love you felt was real. The dreams you had were real. It's okay to grieve them." And so I did. I grieved the marriage I'd believed in, the future I'd imagined, the version of myself who'd trusted too easily and loved too deeply. I let myself cry, really cry, for the first time since everything fell apart. I cried until I was empty, and then slowly I started to fill back up with something new. Not hope, not yet, but something quieter, something steadier. Resilience. I got a job at a bookstore downtown. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to cover rent and daycare. And I loved it. I loved the smell of old pages and fresh coffee. I loved recommending books to strangers and watching their faces light up when they found the perfect story. It reminded me that life could still surprise me, that there was still beauty to be found, even in the wreckage. Emma started saying her first words around that time. Mama was one of them. Not Dada, just Mama. And every time she said it, my heart healed a little more. Some nights were harder than others. Some nights I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering who Emma's real father was, whether he knew she existed, whether he'd want to meet her someday, whether I'd let him. But those thoughts became less frequent as time went on, less sharp, less consuming. Because the truth was, it didn't matter. Emma was mine. She was my daughter, my responsibility, my joy, and I would raise her to know her worth, to demand honesty, to never settle for anything less than the truth. The rain tapped against my window as I stared into the night, Emma asleep in the next room. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something close to peace. Sometimes starting over isn't weakness, it's the purest form of strength. Today Emma is 3 years old. She has my eyes and my stubbornness and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. She loves dinosaurs and strawberries and bedtime stories about brave princesses who save themselves. She doesn't know the story of her birth certificate yet. Someday, when she's older, I'll tell her. I'll tell her the truth, all of it, because she deserves that. But for now, she's just a little girl who knows she's loved. And that's enough. I keep her new birth certificate in a safe in my closet. The one the court issued after the case was settled. It's simple, clean, just 2 names, Emma Rose Parker and mine. No lies, no ghosts, no men who tried to claim her as their own for reasons that had nothing to do with love. I look at it sometimes, when the nights get long and the memories try to creep back in. I look at it and I remember what I fought for. Not revenge, though that's what it felt like at the time. Not justice, though that's what the court called it. What I fought for was truth, the right for my daughter to know who she is, the right for me to define my own family on my own terms. David tried to reach out last year, a letter forwarded through Rebecca. He said he was in therapy, that he'd cut ties with Michael, that he regretted everything, that if I ever wanted to talk, he'd be there. I read it once and then I burned it. Not out of anger, not anymore, but because some chapters need to end completely before new ones can begin. I never did find Emma's biological father. Maybe someday he'll find us. Maybe he won't. Either way, I've made peace with it. Family isn't defined by DNA or ink on a page. It's defined by the people who show up, who stay, who love you even when the world falls apart. My mother is Emma's family. My best friend, Sarah, who flew across the country when everything fell apart and slept on my couch for 2 weeks. She's family. Dr. Chen, who helped me rebuild myself piece by piece. She's family too, in her own way. And me, I'm Emma's family, her protector, her truth teller, her home. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone enough to let them into our lives again. I don't know if I'll ever stop flinching when I hear the name Michael or David in passing. But I do know this. I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be. And Emma will grow up seeing that strength. She'll grow up knowing that when life tries to break you, you have a choice. You can stay broken, or you can gather the pieces and build something new. I choose new. Every single day, I choose new. Because sometimes the truth sets you free, even if it breaks you first. So if you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me share the hardest chapter of my life with you. I'd love to know, what did you think? Have you ever faced a moment where everything you believed turned out to be a lie? How did you find your way back? Leave a comment and tell me which city you're listening from. I love hearing from people all over the world who've walked through their own storms and came out the other side. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. I share more real-life stories like this, stories about resilience, revenge, and the power of reclaiming your truth. Until next time, stay strong, stay honest, and remember you are enough.